There is a command in the Bible that appears more than any other single instruction. Not love your neighbor. Not keep the commandments. Not pray without ceasing. 2 words. Repeated over and over from Genesis to Revelation, spoken by angels, by prophets, by kings, and by God himself in the form of a man standing in front of people who had every reason to be terrified. Fear not. Most people hear that phrase and file it under encouragement. A spiritual pep talk. God's way of saying, calm down, it will be fine, trust me. And it does carry that weight. But if you stay in the verse long enough, if you read what God says in the sentence immediately after fear not, you find something that encouragement reading completely misses. God almost never stops at the command. There is a command in the Bible that appears more than any other single instruction. Not love your neighbor. Not keep the commandments. Not pray without ceasing. 2 words. Repeated over and over from Genesis to Revelation, spoken by angels, by prophets, by kings, and by God himself in the form of a man standing in front of people who had every reason to be terrified. Fear not. Most people hear that phrase and file it under encouragement. A spiritual pep talk. God's way of saying, calm down, it will be fine, trust me. And it does carry that weight. But if you stay in the verse long enough, if you read what God says in the sentence immediately after fear not, you find something that encouragement reading completely misses. God almost never stops at the command. He follows it with a reason. Every single time. And the reason is not a promise about your circumstances. It is not a guarantee that the hard thing goes away. It is something older and stranger and far more powerful than that. The reason God gives for fear not is always himself. That shift from the command to what follows the command changes everything about how you read every frightening moment in Scripture. And every frightening moment in your own life. Before we get into the specific moments, it is worth understanding why the command appears so often. The Hebrew phrase used most frequently is al-tira. Al means do not. Tira comes from the root yer, which means to fear, to be afraid, to stand in dread of something. But yer is a layered word. It is the same root used for the fear of the Lord, the reverent awe that the Bible calls the beginning of wisdom. Proverbs 9:10. So the same word that describes paralyzing terror also describes holy reverence. And that connection is not accidental. Because what God is doing in every fear not moment is not simply removing one fear. He is replacing it. He is inviting the person standing in front of the terrifying thing to redirect their fear, to turn it from the circumstance toward the God who stands behind the circumstance. Do not fear that. Fear me. And when you fear me rightly, that loses its power over you. That is the move underneath every fear not in Scripture. And the only way to see it is to stay in the passage long enough to read what comes next. The first major fear not in Scripture is spoken to one man, alone in the dark. Genesis 15:1. After these things the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision, saying, Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your exceedingly great reward. Stop here. The phrase after these things is doing significant work. It is pointing backward. It is saying read what just happened. What just happened is Genesis 14. Abram had gone to war. He took 318 trained men from his household and pursued a coalition of 4 kings who had kidnapped his nephew Lot. He won. He recovered the people. He recovered the goods. He came home victorious. And then God appears at night and says, Do not be afraid. Which raises an obvious question. What was Abram afraid of? He had just won a battle. He had just been blessed by Melchizedek, the priest of God Most High. He had just refused the king of Sodom's offer of reward, making a public declaration that only God would make him rich. So why fear not? What was the fear? Almost certainly retaliation. 4 kings. Abram had defeated them with 318 men. Those kings had armies. They had resources. They knew where Abram lived. And Abram, for all his faith, was a man living in a tent in someone else's land with no walls and no nation behind him. The victory that had felt like faithfulness now felt like a target on his back. And into that specific fear God speaks. Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield. Not, do not be afraid, the kings will not come back. Not, do not be afraid, you will win again. Not, do not be afraid, I will move you somewhere safer. I am your shield. The reason for courage is not a better circumstance. It is a better protector. God does not promise Abram that the danger disappears. He promises that he himself stands between Abram and the danger. And then he adds something strange. Your exceedingly great reward. Abram had just refused the king of Sodom's offer of wealth. He had said, I will not take a thread or a sandal strap from you, lest you say you have made Abram rich. Genesis 14:23. He had given up a significant material reward as an act of trust. And God's immediate response was, I am your reward. What you gave up, I will be. What you refused to take from a king, you will receive from me. The fear not did not come with a circumstantial fix. It came with a person. God himself as shield. God himself as reward. The answer to Abram's fear was not a better situation. It was a better presence. And God goes further. He makes a covenant. He puts Abram into a deep sleep and walks between the pieces of the animals alone, binding himself to the promise without requiring Abram to perform. Genesis 15:17. The fear not launched one of the most significant covenants in the history of the universe. What follows fear not is always bigger than the fear that preceded it. The second moment is one of the most unexpected fear nots in the entire Bible. Because it is not spoken to a patriarch. It is not spoken to a king or a prophet or a priest. It is spoken to a slave woman alone in the desert with a dying child. Genesis 21. Sarah has demanded that Abraham send Hagar and her son Ishmael away. Abraham does it. Hagar walks into the wilderness of Beersheba with her son and a skin of water. The water runs out. Ishmael is dying. Hagar places him under a shrub, walks away a bowshot's distance and sits down. She cannot watch him die. Genesis 21:16. And she sat opposite him and lifted her voice and wept. And then the angel of God calls to Hagar from heaven. Genesis 21:17. What ails you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the lad where he is. Pause and notice what just happened. This is not Abraham. This is not a man chosen to be the father of nations. This is not someone inside the covenant line God had established through Isaac. This is a woman the covenant family had cast out. A slave. An Egyptian. Someone with no legal standing, no protection, no one to advocate for her. A mother watching her son die of thirst in a desert. And God says, fear not. He does not say fear not because everything will be fine. He says fear not because I have heard. God has heard the voice of the lad where he is. That phrase where he is quietly staggering. It is a declaration that God's attention is not limited to the covenant community. It is not restricted to the tent of Abraham. It is not rationed only to the people who have earned proximity to God. God hears where the child is. Wherever that is. However far outside the camp. However far outside any religious system or structure. And then God opens Hagar's eyes and she sees a well of water. Genesis 21:19. It was already there. She had been sitting beside provision she could not see because fear had narrowed her vision until she could only see the dying child and the empty skin. The fear not did not create the well. It opened her eyes to what was already there. This is the second pattern underneath the command. Fear blinds. When God says fear not, he is not just addressing an emotion. He is restoring sight. He is giving back the vision that terror takes away. Hagar saw only death. God said fear not. And she saw water. What you cannot see right now because of what you are afraid of may already be there. Fear not is sometimes less a promise about the future and more a restoration of sight in the present. Moses is dead. For 40 years he had been the voice of God to Israel. The face of leadership. The one who climbed mountains and spoke with God and came down with his face shining. And now he is buried in a valley in Moab and no one knows the exact location of the grave. Deuteronomy 34:6. And Joshua is standing at the edge of the Jordan River looking at Canaan. He is about to lead a nation of former slaves into a land occupied by walled cities and trained armies. The same land that had broken a previous generation of Israelites who saw the giants and said, "We seem to ourselves like grasshoppers." Numbers 13:33. Joshua knew that story. He had been one of the 12 spies. He had seen the land. He had been one of only 2 who came back with a different report. But he also knew what happened to the other 10. And he knew what happened to the entire generation who listened to them. And now it was his turn to lead. Joshua 1:9. God speaks. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and of good courage. Do not be afraid nor be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Notice the structure. The command comes first. Be strong. Be courageous. Do not be afraid. These are imperatives. God is not making a suggestion. He is issuing an order. But the order is immediately grounded in a fact. For the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Not, do not be afraid because the walls will fall. Not, do not be afraid because your army is strong enough. Not, do not be afraid because the inhabitants will panic. Do not be afraid because I will be with you. Wherever you go. Wherever. The Hebrew is Bakal Asher Telik. In all that you walk. Every path, every battle, every city, every failure, every crossing. In all of it the Lord your God is with you. The command to courage is not rooted in Joshua's ability. It is rooted in God's presence. And this is the third pattern emerging. In Abraham's fear not, God said, I am your shield. In Hagar's fear not, God said, I have heard where you are. In Joshua's fear not, God says, I am with you wherever you go. The answer is always God himself. Not a better strategy. Not a guaranteed outcome. The answer is always the presence of the person making the promise. And then God tells Joshua exactly what to do with the word. Joshua 1:8. This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate in it day and night, that you may observe to do according to all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will have good success. The fear not comes with a practice. Stay in the word. Day and night. Not as a ritual. As a survival mechanism. Because the fear will come back. The walls of Jericho are still standing tomorrow morning. The giants have not left. The anxiety will return with the sunrise. And the antidote God prescribes is not more kurag. Pause for a moment and look at what has already appeared. Abram, alone after a victory, afraid of retaliation. Fear not. I am your shield and your reward. Hagar, alone in a desert with a dying child. Fear not. God has heard where you are. And her eyes were open to water already present. Joshua, alone at the edge of an impossible assignment. Fear not. I am with you wherever you go. Now stay in the word. 3 completely different people. 3 completely different fears. 3 completely different centuries. And in every single case, God does not fix the circumstances first. He offers himself first. The shield. The hearing. The presence. And the pattern is only getting deeper. 700 years before Christ, the nation of Israel is surrounded. The Assyrian Empire has swallowed everything in its path. Israel to the north has already fallen. Judah to the south is next. The prophet Isaiah is speaking to a people who are watching the edges of their world collapse one city at a time. And into that national terror, God speaks one of the longest and most layered fear nots in all of Scripture. Isaiah 41:10. Fear not, for I am with you. Be not dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you. Yes, I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. Count the verbs after fear not. I am with you. I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you. 5 commitments in one sentence. And they move in a specific direction. Presence. Identity. Strength. Help. Physical support. God moves from the largest commitment, I am with you, all the way down to the most physical, I will hold you up with my own hand. The fear not does not stay abstract. It gets concrete. It gets bodily. God is not just promising a spiritual presence. He is promising an upholding hand. Something you can feel. And then 2 verses later, God adds something that might be the most tender statement in the entire book. Isaiah 41:13. For I, the Lord your God, will hold your right hand, saying to you, fear not. I will help you. I will hold your right hand. In the ancient world, a right hand grip was a covenant gesture. It was the handshake of commitment. It was what you did when you were making a binding agreement with another person. It was what a parent did with a frightened child in the dark. It was intimacy. It was security. It was the physical language of I am not leaving. And God takes that gesture, the most human, most physical, most ordinary gesture of comfort, and says, this is what I am doing for you. I am gripping your right hand. And while I am gripping it, I am saying, fear not. The fear not in Isaiah is not spoken from a distance. It is spoken while God is holding your hand. The final moment is the one that pulls all of them together. Matthew 14. The disciples are in a boat in the middle of the Sea of Galilee. Jesus has sent them ahead while he went up the mountain to pray. A storm has come. The wind is against them. The waves are beating the boat. And it is the 4th watch of the night, somewhere between 3 and 6 in the morning, which means they have been fighting this storm for hours. And then they see something moving toward them on the water. Matthew 14:26. And when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were troubled, saying, it is a ghost. And they cried out for fear. They were already afraid of the storm. And then the thing that should have ended the fear made it worse, because they did not recognize him. And immediately Jesus spoke to them, saying, be of good cheer. It is I, do not be afraid. The Greek there is ego eimi. I am. The same words God used when Moses asked his name at the burning bush. I am who I am. Exodus 3:14. Jesus does not say, it is me, calm down. He says, I am. He is reaching back to the oldest self-declaration of God in Scripture and placing it in the middle of a storm on a lake in Galilee. Do not be afraid, because the one walking toward you is the I am. And Peter, being Peter, says, Lord, if it is you, command me to come to you on the water. Jesus says, come. Peter gets out of the boat. Peter walks on water. And then Peter sees the wind, becomes afraid, and begins to sink. Matthew 14:30. And beginning to sink, he cried out, saying, Lord, save me. And immediately Jesus stretched out his hand and caught him, and said to him, O you of little faith, why did you doubt? Here is what most people do with this moment. They use it as a lesson about keeping your eyes on Jesus and not on the storm. And that is true. But there is something else happening in the Greek that is worth sitting with. The word translated doubt is distazo. It appears only twice in the entire New Testament, both times in Matthew. And it does not mean unbelief. It does not mean Peter stopped believing Jesus was real. Distazo means to stand in 2 places at once. To be pulled in 2 directions simultaneously. To have your attention divided. Peter was not an unbeliever. He was a divided believer. He believed in Jesus and he saw the wind. He had faith and he had fear. And for a moment the fear got louder. And Jesus did not let him drown. Immediately, the text says, Jesus stretched out his hand immediately. Peter said, save me, and Jesus was already reaching before the sentence finished. The fear not in Matthew 14 is not just a command. It is a hand in the dark. It is a grip that does not wait for Peter to get his theology straight before it holds on. The I am who walked on water is the same I am who held Hagar's attention in a desert, who stood between Abram and retaliation, who went before Joshua into Canaan, who gripped Isaiah's right hand. Every fear not in the Bible is the same voice. Every hand extended in the storm is the same hand. So what does all of this mean when you are the one who is afraid? Because you are. Not theoretically. Right now there is something in your life that has not resolved. A diagnosis. A relationship. A door that closed and another that will not open. A future that used to feel clear and now feels like fog. And the fear is not a spiritual failure. Every person in this study was afraid. Abram was afraid. Hagar was afraid. Joshua was afraid. Isaiah's entire nation was afraid. Peter was afraid in the middle of a miracle. Fear is not the opposite of faith. Divided attention is. The question is not whether you are afraid. The question is what you do with the fear. Whether you let it narrow your vision until all you can see is the empty water skin and the dying child. Or whether you let God redirect it toward himself, toward his presence, toward the hand already reaching. And here is what the pattern of every fear not in Scripture tells us about how to do that. Stay in the Word. Not because reading the Bible is a magic formula, but because the Word is where you hear the voice. And the voice is what the fear not has always been. It is not a principle. It is a person speaking. And the person is still speaking. Right now, in whatever room you are sitting in whatever season you are carrying. The same voice that said, "Do not be afraid," to a man alone after a victory, to a woman alone in a desert, to a leader alone at an impossible threshold, to a prophet speaking to a nation on the edge of collapse, to a fisherman sinking in a storm, that voice has not gone silent. It is saying the same thing it has always said, and following it with the same reason it has always given. Do not be afraid. I am here. There is a detail in the Matthew 14 story that is easy to rush past. After Jesus pulls Peter out of the water, after they both climb into the boat, after the wind stops, the text says the disciples worshipped him. Not the disciples were relieved. Not the disciples finally calmed down. They worshipped. Because they had just seen what fear not actually looks like when it arrives in the middle of the storm. Not a calm voice from a safe distance. A person walking through the worst weather, extending a hand before the sinking man finishes his sentence, climbing into the boat and sitting down with them. The storm did not disappear first. He arrived first. And his arrival was enough. That is every fear not in the Bible. Not a promise that the hard thing does not happen. A promise that you will not face it alone. A hand reaching across the water before you finish asking. The I am who said fear not to Abram. The God who heard Hagar where she was. The presence who went with Joshua wherever he walked. The hand that gripped Isaiah's right hand in the dark. The voice on the water that said, "It is I, do not be afraid." Same voice. Same hand. Same reason. He is already walking toward you. If this opens something for you, share it with one person today who is in the middle of something frightening. Not because they need a theology lesson. Because they need to hear that the I am is still speaking. And that what comes right after fear not has always been worth staying in the verse for. Subscribe if you want to keep going deeper. Leave a comment, even one word. It helps more people find this than you would think. And to those of you already walking through something that has no easy answer, may you hear the voice that has never once raised it in panic, never once spoken it from a distance, never once said fear not without staying to tell you why. He is your shield. He has heard where you are. He is with you wherever you go. He is holding your right hand. And he is already in the boat. God bless you. Thanks for watching Honest Bible Talk. If this message encouraged you, like, subscribe, and come back for more Bible truth, hope, and honest faith conversations. See you next time.